Good morning, everyone. It is so nice to be here with you virtually. I'm Jesslyn Jackson, Director of Membership, Sonoma County Vintners. I am excited to take some of our in-person seminars that we have focused on throughout the last couple years and finally be able to bring them to you in this new reality of the virtual world. For our first seminar, we really thought a shifting of your marketing efforts would be really helpful, and some key topics about how to do that in this current environment. So we brought in one of our affiliate partners, Sonoma State University, and we requested Dr. Damian Wilson, professor and Hamill Family Chair of the Wine Business Institute, to help us out with this material, and we're really looking forward to presenting it to you today. Just so you know, a couple things. We sent over a Slido presentation that Dr. Damian Wilson created. If you haven't filled it out, it's very interactive and we'll be using it throughout the presentation. So feel free to go ahead and do that now. Also, you can use the Q&A, and we'll be taking brief pauses after each of the major slides to see if anybody has any questions for the room and answer them at the end of each slide. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Damian Wilson of Sonoma State University.
Thanks for that, Jesslyn. I must say that's both a welcome introduction, covered some really important details about how these webinars can prove really beneficial. And I think many of you are probably suffering from Zoomitis or some sort of webinaritis these days, but finding out that the use of this platform actually has a lot of benefits as well that many of us were unaware of prior to having been put in this situation. So although we've come together in virtual means and under difficult circumstances, the reality is I think we're all getting a really good insight into how to determine ways to kind of work on business or have business operate in the virtual world. Coming in, I think, drag screaming to paradise of the 21st century is a phrase that came to mind. I'm going to start by sharing a screen with you here, and just following on from what Jesslyn was saying, I'm going to show you this presentation. So you should at least have an idea or an outline about what's being said. Now, I'll go into the details about how you can get onto that Slido presentation if you wish to contribute. For those of you who'd already done so in the lead up to this presentation, thank you very much. As a market researcher, I certainly try to do my research on both the people we work with, our colleagues and partners, in looking towards the best interests of the global wine sector. And certainly the struggle that we're all having to deal with, is kind of navigating the new norm, I think was a great title for this presentation. So I'll go through a couple of details, and I'll throw to Jesslyn at the end of each slide just to see if there are any questions there. If you do have any questions, please click on the Q&A tab, type your questions in as they come to mind. And that's certainly going to be helpful as a means to kind of follow up on them when they're relevant to you. Okay, so I'll just start with them. I found that this slide is particularly important when presenting to new audiences, for those of you who are unfamiliar with me or my background. That's a picture that was clearly taken a few years ago. I've got a bit more grey since that point in time, but luckily, being a black and white image, you probably can't tell that too much compared to the colour picture on your screen at the moment. I am, as Jesslyn mentioned, the Hamill Family Chair and Professor of Wine Marketing, or one of the Professors of Wine Marketing at the Wine Business Institute at Sonoma State University. I hold 4 degrees in wine business, including a PhD. My research expertise comes from specifically consumer behaviour patterns, how people come into wine as a category, how behaviour changes over time, and what we can learn about patterns of consumer behaviour. I've also done extensive research in digital communications. I was one of the first in the field of wine business to be looking at how communications are conducted online effectively, more than just looking at it as a conceptual approach, and have published extensively on that. Also, I've done a bit of research in wine tourism. And specifically, my research started with innovation adoption. I was part of the Australian Wine Research Institute's initial outline or initial research that went into the change over to the use of screw caps in Australia when it was adopted for the 21st century. And in 1999, that was part of my honours thesis. So looking at the screw caps and then doing a lot of research on innovation adoption and adoption of new products is essentially the area that I started researching and have a fair bit of experience in that area. But this also happened after a period of about 20 years of wine industry experience. So I came into academia specifically because I was looking at the fact that the wine industry, we were creating a lot of wine experts and winemakers and grape growers, but we were really short of the people who were good at the business side of the wine industry. And as someone who came from that side of the industry, I wanted to be able to give back. And so that kind of drew me into academia, being able to draw on my professional experience from retail sales, from the service and hospitality industry, and specifically from working in the distribution and promotion area. So I bring that helpful mix of my background professional experiences into the classroom, and hopefully effectively communicate that through this webinar today. For those who are interested and are familiar with the concept of the QR code, the contact details are all available if you do happen to flash that, and that can actually be done with a recording of this presentation anyway. My social handle is WineBizProf. I made the mistake, I think, of using biz as shorthand for business, whereas I probably should have called it BI, I think you say Z in this country. Okay, so for those who haven't already done so, if you're interested in responding to the poll, because the important thing about using that poll is any good researcher will try to conduct as much research as they can to get information on the needs of their audience. And one of the, I think, lingering messages of any student who's been in my classroom, they get the first message from the first day of the first class that they have with me of the importance of research. Research, research, research is the goal and is the underlying tool that's required by anyone who's good at marketing. Marketers are essentially talented, or their skills are judged on their ability to be able to adapt to the needs of their market, and they can only do that if they are good researchers. So my students, typically in the first class, one of the first questions I ask them is, what do they know about me? And that's with the ubiquitous response, you're Australian, usually opening up with laughs. The reality is that aside from that, few of them have actually done any research whatsoever. And so I always start with that message. So this is the first time you've had me as a professor and you don't know anything about me. You come into your first class and you have no idea about what my background, my research interests, my outlook might be. And as a student, students have to figure out ways to work with their educators as a means to get the best grades and get the best out of the experience. So if they're not doing that from that first class, they typically get that message pretty quickly after highlighting that I will have done some research on them in the class, and accordingly also was interacting with Jesslyn to try and find out what you were looking for in this webinar. Hence why I presented this, I put this poll together. And for those of you who haven't used this, this is actually a useful classroom tool as well as with an audience interaction tool. This website Slido, they realized that to have online or in real-time interactions between a presenter and an audience, they had to have something that wasn't an app that you had to download, because people typically can't do that when they're at conferences or when they're at events specifically like this. And so if you put SLIDO in any web browser, you'll be able to click on, be able to open up to a screen that'll look something like that, and there'll be an event code box. If you put the event code box as shown on the screen here, the code is up in the top right-hand corner, SCV May 12. And if you put that in there, you should have the opportunity to answer questions as they're indicated there. Okay, and for those who haven't, I've just been told that it says that there are no active polls, and that's probably because I'm running this, I'm using a new tool. I'll come to this in a second, but whilst I'm giving some of you the opportunity to do that, I am working in the background and making a point of activating that poll because it was done yesterday, but I think there is a reason that that would be the case, and I was going to say, yep, that will be fixed as of now. It should instantaneously be fixed. I've found that there's I'll come to this in a minute and explain how that happened. But essentially, all of you should be able to get onto that poll. Should be able to get onto that poll now for those who wish to. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, so what are we going to cover in today's presentation? Well, Few things. First of all, this webinar is going to include a number of hopefully valuable and salient issues for you. Hence why you've joined today. First of all, we're going to, knowing that we're going to cover how the current crisis should be used to cater to the emergent off-premise opportunity. And I know for many of you, certainly the numbers suggested that the better part of you have lost almost instantaneously access to the market with the closing down or the reduction in opportunities in on-premise retail. And because on-premise is all but closed for the immediate future, and pivoting to off-premise is fraught with challenges and or coupled with brutal competition alongside slim margins. This really is fallow ground for wineries that have come to rely on allocation, sommelier endorsement, and extensive waiting lists. Secondly, one of the key messages that was communicated to me in preparation for this session was the importance of maintaining this concept of authenticity. And authenticity in markets with restricted access is one of the kind of important counterpoints and interaction effects that they have. And balancing the need to maintain cash flow with the long-term strategy of developing your image is a really difficult juggling exercise. There's a tactical need to access the off-premise channel in the short term, but relationship needs to support on-premise and delivery in the short term, as well as a long-term need to establish and grow your winery's reputation. So that really does mean that the challenges you're facing are going to be tough, particularly in the new environment. How to generate success in the current environment, I suspect you'll all be looking at. I have to issue a spoiler at this point. I don't have a silver bullet, but I do have a solution. So essentially, I'm not going to turn around and say, do this and everything's going to be fine. But there is a pathway to be able to be successful despite the challenges that you're facing. I'll highlight some common challenges and oversights that everyone's facing and conclude on specifically the best courses of action for wineries. So let's start with the first approach in this whole emergent off-premise opportunity. Okay, at the end of this slide, I'll just check with Jessalyn to see if we've got any questions. So if any of them come up, please feel free to post them in the chat box as they do. The off-premise opportunity, there are essentially two key underlying elements that help facilitate sales in the mind of the consumer. And the first one is the generation of brand awareness. Consumers have to have awareness of your brand and availability at the point of sale. So they're kind of the two elements that you have to balance. Constantly, you'll be looking at creating this balance between brand awareness for your brand, and doesn't matter what that perspective is. Creating brand awareness is the biggest challenge. And I use this a paraphrase from a popular movie back in the 90s, and that was quoted in the Usual Suspects, with the Kaiser Soze character saying the greatest trick the devil pulled was convincing people that he didn't exist. And for the wine industry, it's pretty much a play on words in that regard. The greatest challenge you're facing as a brand owner is convincing people that you do exist. Because if people aren't even aware that you exist, you have no chance of your brand being chosen, except at random based on your brand's representation over the number of all brands available at point of sale. So anything you can do to try and influence and increase that availability or awareness in the mind of the consumer when they're considering a purchase is something that you have to absolutely latch on to. So brand awareness in the mind of the consumer is the one thing that you have to be aware of with your customers, and figure out ways that you can use that awareness to attract potential customers as well. And that should be measured across different distribution channels. One of the distribution options, like selling wine by the glass, for example, it was often, when I was working in distribution, it was a convenient tool to try and a selling tool to try and generate sales. But I always wondered how the brand owner felt about their wine usually being discounted because it was being sold by the glass, with the argument being that there was a proportion of wastage that had to be covered. But also the other issue is that when you serve a wine by the glass, there's no branding available at the point of delivery about that wine. So unless the consumer actually remembers salient features about that wine that they ordered by the glass, how do you go about reinforcing the brand awareness during the process of consumption? If your wine's outstanding, a consumer might write the name down. They may remember it for a later time, but in most cases, consumers are just overwhelmed. They don't even have a visual representation. All they have is a name on a wine list, for example. So measuring your awareness in that distribution channel would be a really tricky ask. But measuring it across distribution channels is the way that you need to investigate where you should be diverting your attention to try and increase the awareness of your brand. You already know that your brand is aware for people who visit your tasting room. And for your wine club with your DTC sales, they know your brand exists because essentially they've either turned up and signed up to your wine club, or you're constantly delivering something to them, which is reinforcing the image of your brand. So that helps. But how about for on-premise, with the example that I just highlighted, and for the 3-tier system, where your wine is sold in a retail front? What chance does your wine have of being chosen amongst all competitors, not just those that are sitting on either side of your wine brand in the shelf? If consumers have never heard of your brand, if they're being introduced to it at that moment, at that first point in time when they're picking it up off the shelf, or when they're passing it by on the shelf, then really you're not giving yourself as good an opportunity as you should be doing to be able to increase that attention. So the second thing is the product availability at the point of sale. So creating that awareness is a key element, and understanding how consumers think about your brand, how they consider wine, what wine means to them, and how you can connect your brand story with that message is a key starting point. Secondly, is the product availability at the point of sale. So in what situations, under what occasions, what motivations encourage consumers to purchase your wine or to consider your brand in competition with others? And that's really how you need to know at this point in time how consumers discover your brand. That's kind of the key point of the exercise. What are your sales metrics in off-premise like? How do they compare against your competitors on similar price points, in similar regions, in similar retail environments? These are the sorts of things that, the sorts of questions that marketers get excited about, because knowing those answers helps determine what your communications strategy should be, what your marketing platform is going to be more or less appropriate or effective for you, and those sorts of questions are the things that really do get marketers going. If you're not interested in knowing the answer to those questions, you're probably in the wrong field. How about for restaurants and takeout? Now, this is really, it poses a new opportunity because this is a distribution method which didn't exist 2 months ago. So the potential of your brand being sold. Now, I heard infinite number of times about how consumers didn't go for small packages, up until a few years ago when all of a sudden canned wine sales increased 200% in 12 months. Now all of a sudden you've got people considering that, and you've also have those who are out there, but I suspect many in the areas where wine is well premiumized, who would argue against the usage of cans as a distribution format. I think a lot of that harks back from traditional perspectives and much in the way of elitism. And the important element is to recognise that you don't necessarily have a conflict within your brand's message by offering a different package format that caters to the interest of the consumer. So how you go about selling your product through as a takeout opportunity in a unit serve is a difficult challenge. I know, because most people haven't considered that until the coronavirus, but it's certainly one now which consumers are considering. Looking at videos of people ordering their margaritas to go and those sorts of things suggests that why is it that wine isn't or can't be doing the same sort of thing. How about for e-business strategy? Yes, I know many of you looked at that and indicated that as being one of the issues that was particularly challenging. And I get that. I get the concern if it's something that you haven't done before. But the concept of the e-business strategy, if wine's lackluster figures in general with e-tailing compared to other consumer goods industries aren't a sign that we hadn't really embraced the format effectively enough. Certainly, with the numbers that companies like Wine.com and other e-tailers are putting out at the moment, with the increase in sales that they're seeing at the moment, it suggests that this crisis has debilitating as it is to many of us, can also offer a silver lining in the long-term solution. What's going to happen to this platform in due course? We don't know. How are the rules going to change as the economy starts opening up? We don't know for sure, but we certainly know it's something that we should be prepared for. And as shown by Danny Brager, the numbers that he indicated in his latest presentation, he was showing how the purchase of alcohol from takeout, I mean, that was a category that didn't exist, and then has grown from being 9% of all takeout sales to 14% involves some form of alcohol. So looking at that, you might think that those numbers are quite low, but bearing in mind that it's gone from nothing and consumers were never able to do this, there's certainly a period of learning that is being experienced. And as people have gone from ordering their takeout without it or considering to stop over at the liquor store on the way after picking up their takeout, all of a sudden now they're going, well, I don't have to. That, as people learn about that could potentially be one of those distribution channels where there are some great opportunities to be had as consumers learn and become more familiar with that process. So being prepared for that and being able to adapt to it are some really key points. That's at the base of the first slide, but I don't see any questions or anything in the Q&As at the moment. So just give me a second to have a look at that. And we've got no's. And so either everyone's sitting there, I know you're transfixed to what I'm saying, and it's just it's keeping you from putting questions out there, but I'm just happy so far. I'll move on to the maintaining authenticity. So highlighting to close on that slide, the off-premise opportunity, there are new opportunities that are opening up. We just need to be receptive to them, and we don't have to take everything on board. Don't get me wrong by saying that just because it's there that you have to jump into it. I'm not suggesting that for a second, but I am compelling you to review what the options are that are available to you, and perhaps to consider a strategy, even if it is just a tactical approach that's done in the short term to deal with the current situation. So that moving on or segueing from that position, the concerns that you might have with using a unit selling volumes, the concern about your brand's image and those sorts of things, that moves us quite nicely into the next topic, which is maintaining authenticity. And the reality on this slide is, I think for many of us, it's really challenging because we just don't know what's happening, and we really are entering a stage of the new normal. What's going to happen with regulations as we move out and the economies open up? I dare say for a period of time, there are going to be, during the transition stage, where things are going to be left as they are currently to help facilitate economic growth, facilitate interactions between consumers as business. There's every likelihood that these emergency allowances that have been made are likely to stay in the short term. But I want to kind of highlight a key point and a message that's really important at this point in time, and that's essentially that you have to accept that the current environment is in a constant state of beta testing. So even as good as we would like things to be, a similar thing here with using technology. I was chatting in preparations with Jessalyn and the team about this presentation, how difficult it's been just being able to adapt to this new format. Now, I've been using webinars to teach back from when I was in France. I've lived in 3 continents. I lived in France and ran a master's, an international master's in wine business program at the Burgundy School of Business for 7 years. And when I started there, they had to teach this program in English with expertise on wine business. Now getting someone French in the heart of French wine country to talk about wine, even in English, is not that difficult. But getting someone French in the heart of wine country to talk with authority on successful business principles, that's far more challenging. So the only way I could do that was by using webinars to try and channel in people from different parts of the world. And that was back in the late 20noughts. And so in that era, the technology then was pretty basic for doing these sort of webinars. So in that time, I've seen constant change and upgrading in webinar technology. And I can tell you what's happened in the last 2 months with regard to this platform has changed more in the last 2 months than it has probably in the previous 3 years. So different interactions, you just have to get used to them and adapt to the fact that you can never be prepared. You have to be as prepared as you can possibly be. And I say to students, because a number of students struggle with me, if I mark them what they perceive to be too hard, they're expecting higher grades, and I'll turn around and say, give up on the idea of perfection. It's not going to be a situation where everything's right and you can get into it. You have to accept that you are going to have to deal with challenges and upgrades on a constant basis. And just with this platform, I've integrated Slido into the presentation today, and what I'm learning is every time I start this presentation up, it seems to reset my my online poll. So I have to renew that. So it takes time to get used to that sort of thing. Just have to be able to adapt and aware that it's not going to be perfect. So if that's being the case, how do we adapt to that situation? Well, the reality regarding authenticity is that authenticity was based on a completely different model before this happened. We, as an industry, kind of regarded our enthusiasts, those who are knowledgeable, as being the great arbiters on the quality of our wine. That's unlikely to be the case going forward. That's not to say that influencers won't still be influential, but it's going to be more about those who adapt more readily to the interface, the digital concept as a means for interaction, and the businesses that adapt more readily to that and understand the different motivations and means for interaction through that platform are going to be those who are going to be more successful at it or able to adapt. One constant is the reality that premiumization will always exist. There is always a desire for the best of the best. It's just what those dictates are of the best is going to be based on trends over time. I mean, if we look back at the 1855 model of the Grand Cru Classé in Bordeaux as a reference point, yes, there are some invariables there, but some would argue that those invariables still vary over time. And if we look at a similar situation, the reference to the Napa first growths, or what I would like to see as the Sonoma first growths, as we come into this era where wines from Sonoma County have certainly attracted a lot more headlines and attention for the inherent quality. So what that quality is going to be going forward will be a portion from what we're familiar with, but is also going to have been adapted and changed in a certain way. So the pathway and criteria for achieving a premiumized product, or product that is exclusive, luxurious, if you will, is going to differ. To what degree, how, and with what criteria, it's more difficult to tell at this stage. But if we look back at the situation prior to the crisis and use that as our reference, it's only going to answer a certain part of that question. So recognize that authenticity is not what you think it is, it's what others think your authentic product is. Because it used to be the Robert Parkers and the Jancis Robinson MWs of the world, or even the Eric Asimov or Esther Mobley, some are writing up reviews about our wine. I recall back in the 1990s, we were seeing at that stage a kind of a law of diminishing returns on the value of critical reviews, winning show awards, using trophies and those sorts of things. And they were becoming less and less influential. Yet that tends to be the wine producer's MO. It's an idea that we can try and make a 100-point wine, or we can push to try and get a trophy. And because there are isolated examples of that working every now and then, people still think that that is the ultimate approach, and it's really not. Certainly not in the modern environment, as the wine market has become more digital and more democratized. It's having an influence, but it's having an influence on perceptions rather than reality. And so the reality, or the new normal with regard to authenticity, is the importance of having a credible message, having a credible product. And that's very different on a generational basis. If we go back to what my grandparents were saying was a credible wine, it was essentially some of the big brands that were out there, and they were reliable. And they didn't care in the slightest that these brands were unidirectionally promotional, and basically were just out there, what we used to call in Australia, slinging grog. That concept of credibility has changed dramatically on a generational and cohort basis. And so what is going to make your message credible in the coming era is yet to be determined. we still know that the value of recommendations. Recommendations sell the most wine, irrespective. I'll point out to my students, the research shows consistently in the modern era that the three most valuable selling tools for any wine are recommendation, recommendation, and recommendation. And so that's the sort of thing that we need to be looking at, not necessarily a trophy as inherent credibility, because consumers are kind of skeptical of where that trophy came from. Was it purchased in order to give? And there's also a random element, as many researchers have shown. The awarding of trophies is as much to do with luck as it is to do with the inherent values of production. So focusing on recommendations, and those recommendations that what degree and how influential they can be are going to be key points moving forward. The authentic experiences for those at the forefront of the new market are really important elements to recognise and be able to embrace from your perspective. So I'll just go to the question that's on that's been posted so far while we go and have a look at the poll that was that you responded to, and I'll see how well how those numbers have changed since I last looked at it yesterday. Questions come up from Lisa Allen. Thank you, Lisa, for posting that. With the on-premise channel shrinking, fewer outlets will make it out of this crisis. It will be even more competitive than it already was, so everyone will look to shift to off-prem. But their shelves and sets will not get larger, so how do we try and insert ourselves in a space where smaller wineries perhaps have not had significant presence? Great question. It's certainly a question which I'm sure that you and many others who are in this audience are thinking of the similar thing, looking at that fear of the change in actual retail space that is not echoed with that is a concern for those who are trying to get into this channel. I don't know the actual numbers, but it's rumoured that less than 50% of all wineries in North America actually have a route to market. So that makes it really challenging in its own right. With the hourglassing of the distribution channel, that's been a challenge for us. It's going to put a lot more onus on the brand owner in showing a value in listing the brand in the first place. One solution I would point to is saying that the e-platform, the long tail effect, certainly has that as an opportunity for you. I know that with the crisis hitting, Wine.com limited their number of brands available so that they could maintain supply for the brands that were most desired by their customers. So getting into that sort of top tier of brands that make that cut every year is an important element in the lead up to the festive period this year. Having distribution so your wine can be distributed virtually gets around that concept, but the issue that you are forced them to deal with is that your brand has to come to mind to the consumer. So you have to find ways that consumers are going to be looking for your brand. So whether it's an association with Sonoma County Chardonnay because of its inherent recognition as being exceptional quality, that could be something that the consumers are looking for. So coming up in a search, optimizing the ways for your brand to be found through an e-platform is one way to get around that. But the key element is for a retailer. I think a lot of producers have struggled with this idea that just getting the product into the distribution channel and allowing the wholesalers and retailers to sell the wine for them is kind of passing the buck to a degree. The reality is that the brand owner, if the brand owner can create demand in the mind of the consumer, if the retailer will list anything that sells. So if you as a brand owner can show means for being able to generate interest in your brand, and I don't know how many people you'd need, how often you'd have to show that, but just coming up with examples, and they're actually not hard to find. I spent a bit of time on Twitter recently, in preparation for this presentation, just asking questions about a simple question along the lines of, who has purchased wine from a recommendation on Twitter. And I can't tell you the number of people who responded with actual examples of when they did and explaining how those changes occurred. So if you can present to a retailer an example that they are, by putting your wine in their portfolio, by putting your wine up for sale, that the wine is going to sell and you've got evidence of it, that's a winner. Any retailer worth their salt is going to take on something that is going to make money for them, is going to sell by themselves. It's when they have to put effort into it. And this was always the kiss of death for any brand when I was distributing. If you walked into a retailer, as soon as you mentioned that word hand selling, you could just see their faces turning away immediately, going, we haven't got the time. You know, that's what they're thinking. We can't do this. We can't rely on that wine getting out there. If the wine can sell itself, they'll list it. Retailers sell real estate. If your real estate turns over more readily than others, you'll get listings that way. So it's a challenge, particularly if it's not something you've had to think about previously, but recognizing that there are ways that you can show that. There are ways that you can illustrate that your brand will sell, and that will work. One thing I'll steer everyone away from is using focus groups. Because that was the method that was adopted back in the late 20th century to try and get wine into different retailers. But first of all, a focus group is not the appropriate platform for being able to do that. And you'll find that retailers tend to be quite skeptical of focus group results because of the shortcomings of that methodology as a selling tool. So. Last question before I move on to the next slide. Thanks for the follow-up, Lisa. Does it give more power to the big brands or discount and or pay to play for on and off premise sales? Yes, absolutely. But the big brands, it's not just the fact that they can be or are selling or buying into product space. The reality about the big brands is that they win based on the fact that they're big brands. A big brand has a much greater footprint in the mind of the consumer. I don't think there are many wine consumers out there who would never have heard of Gallo. I mean, there might be. I haven't actually done that research on their brand awareness, and Gallo certainly aren't forthcoming with their market research results. If they want to, I'd be very happy to read them. But the fact of the matter is, the big brands benefit because they're big brands. They win by a concept what we refer to as the double jeopardy principle in marketing, and it means that they not only have larger market share, but because they're bigger, they also show a repeat purchase rate which is higher to bigger brands than smaller brands. So smaller brands kind of they're at a loss in that regard. So being able to find a platform, a niche in the market where you over-index compared to others, and you've got a viable market space because you know that there are enough consumers buying that type of product often enough, whether it's based on geographic segmentation or wine stylistic segmentation, that's up to you. But if your small brand can compete as a bigger brand effectively in a smaller market segment, you'll find that you will benefit from those sorts of opportunities as well. LibDib fan, I'm not going to get into one platform or another, but I do think that one thing I will say about the options that are out there to offer e-tailing opportunities to brand owners. I think there are a lot of great solutions out there, and I think the best one for you as a producer should be based on what they're going to do for you, how they're going to help move your product, and being able to represent you in the way that you would best like to be represented. So remember that how you want to be represented may not be as consistent with how the market sees you, and understanding that that disparity is also an important element in the new normal. Okay, so let's take a look at the results of the poll that I set up for this event. Okay, so looking at the research that's been presented here. Oops, let me go back to that. Looking at the research that's been set up here, we've got your primary role, your most of the respondents, and I think these are based on the old numbers. So I'll put the new numbers up at the end of the presentation. I'll show you these are the ones that I got in place. Either that or no one's had a chance to answer those questions yet. But we can see here the key lessons, and this is what helped me determine what's important to present. Diversifying distribution, sales planning, knowing your customer is a key message. I can't reinforce that enough. The message I did want to convey, and this is one thing that came up, reminding customers to purchase directly from small family-owned wineries who have the capability to ship direct to them. That message, I think, the way it's couched there is the point I wanted to make. The ability to motivate local people to buy locally is a message which does resonate with people. Right? It's certainly, particularly when they're stuck in their houses, getting something local there are these triggers, what we refer to as priming references in the mind. but you have to be very careful with that message. And my criticism so far of the wine industry in general is with this crisis, most have gone into sales triggering mode. So this whole idea that panic, we need to sell wine. And I've been cold called. I literally got 2 phone calls yesterday by a winery that I hadn't had any interaction with for years, telling me what a great deal they've got for me, and that's why they rang me. Now, the same thing with this message that's been put up there. Selling that message to the consumer to focus on supporting local businesses is a really good message. If you're focusing on support me because I'm a local business, that's one that's not. That ends up being, comes across as being professionally self-centered instead of in the interests of the region. So I'm focusing on the importance of supporting your local business. And I found this similarly with this crisis. I started cooking more at home, thinking, okay, I'm concerned about employment, concerned about access to finance and those sorts of things. And so I stopped spending a lot of money as I started drinking from my cellar, as I started making more food at home. I mean, my sourdough game's right up to speed these days, and I didn't have one beforehand, so that's great. But I was reminded that with takeout, that's a local business. And someone was saying, these businesses are struggling. You need to be able to get out there. And so all of a sudden, I've adapted an approach where we're doing takeout at least twice a week, just so that we can, it helps. I've got teenage boys, so that always helps as well. But it's really making me feel a lot better about spending and supporting local businesses. So getting that message out as a way to communicate the importance of supporting local businesses is a great message. And so that's the sort of thing which may actually come, if we can leverage on the back of the success of communications with Sonoma County Vintners, that's something which can be really helpful. Diversification of income streams, that's a really good point. And I want to highlight, many producers want to have that luxurious image. They want to have the prestigious product that is desired above all others. But the reality is consumers don't start at the top end of the market. And we are, it's been mentioned a number of times. I don't have to flog the dead horse on this one, but our traditional wine consumers are maturing. Many of them are reducing their wine consumption, and their expenditure will follow in that regard. So we have to bring new consumers into the category. We constantly have to be bringing new consumers into the category. And if we don't do that, we put too much investment that we rely on in older consumers spending more money on wine. And so you have to have that interaction, that mix between the consumer who is already involved and interested and wants to spend more money, but they don't start at the top of the market. No one comes in drinking $100 bottles of Pinot Noir as their starting point. They have to have a pathway and ladder their way up. So getting your brand message right, so you've got your cash flow products coming from the market entry or the introductory products for new consumers to your brand and wine as a category, and having a pathway to kind of help them work their way up that to the premium segment over a period of time is a really important brand architecture to have. So diversifying those income streams, yes, sure, your introductory products may not make a lot of money, but if you're getting cash flow through turnover, then that in itself is providing you the opportunity and the security of business to be able to continue doing those, focusing your efforts into maintaining the image of premiumization for your top brands. Distribution keeps rolling, DTC, turning lookers into buyers. The challenge is your product has to represent something that they want to buy. You can try and convince them with sales technique. That's the whole caveat emptor, buyer beware approach is gone with the dinosaurs. They're the days that work that still work to a degree with boomers because they're more familiar with that means of selling. But certainly to a greater degree, newer generations want more interaction and are certainly more likely to support your brand if they feel that you're doing it for an interest that they're interested in, rather than just because the wine's good. So, these sorts of things, I'm selling DTC without tasting room visits, and that probably leads quite nicely into the modern environment where we'll get into some issues to do with like the virtual tasting room and the like. We can see here that the numbers are down and already down on profit. I know, and I was going to say, I know and certainly appreciate them you're hurting. And this number, I was going to say, with these particular drop in sales through the different wine clubs and tasting rooms. That's where we're seeing these numbers drop down. And it's understandable that that's happening, particularly when you see the percentage of those sales volume that have gone down through those platforms has dropped substantially. So, you could argue and say, there's been a lot invested in that platform, and part of it, just with that platform dropping off overnight, there's an impossibility in pivoting overnight. I get that. But there's also recognition that if you do have diverse distribution opportunities, then this falling down, you've already got the experience and a better capacity to ramp up through other distribution means. Some of the things that have been done: email campaigns, virtual tastings. The virtual tasting one I'll come back to just presently. Cold calling, I think, as a sales tool, I certainly wouldn't encourage it at this point in time. There's been a notable backlash online about some people saying, why are wineries ringing? I haven't heard from them. I might have signed up or visited them years ago, and their first call to me is to ask me to buy something, even though I've had no interaction with them over previous years. And some critics, I've been one of them in the past as well. I've often found it really difficult to find places to visit, and I would rely on my online network to give me recommendations, and have found difficulty in receiving responses from wineries even after weeks. There was a campaign I tried to initiate. I won't go into the details here, but a campaign I tried to initiate, and I contacted 43 wineries over the period of this campaign, and the first one that got back to me was 3 months later. So, this was a situation highlighting where you've got platforms where people are trying to interact or trying to show you their interest, and if they're not seeing a response, to then ring people when you need them it smacks of a lack of consideration or empathy for the challenges consumers are dealing with at the moment. So I can see these here. I'll summarize this and send a link to this as well, so everyone can get a copy of this after the presentation. But seeing here that this background is consistent or similar to the responses that Sonoma County Vintners got with their survey as well. So it's good to know that primarily the response rate was similar with what they received with their survey. And the key points here that I wanted to highlight: opening up for curbside pickup has made a huge difference. I actually I contacted a winery through Instagram recently, and they that was one of the first things they offered, and I thought, that's great. There's one I need and can go out and get hold of. There's a recognition of the challenges that the consumer group is facing, and a willingness to adapt, and showing that it's one small thing that's been done. The curbside pickup being a good thing here. Feedback from attendees of virtual experiences, I'll be interested in exploring that as well. Facebook tastings, the virtual tasting environment, I've been doing a few of those myself, and I've got formulating a response that's going to go out into to get published soon. We've got some examples here about consumers. Consumers want to drink wine. Consumers have shown an interest in it. They're wanting to get back out to the tasting room, and those sorts of things, and those sorts of examples are really good examples about the benefits that we're all seeing. So let's go into that and let's see what that means as we close up or we finish up on this presentation. Specifically, it comes down to the question about what do you know about your consumers. What do they like about your brand? These sorts of things. The virtual tasting platform has gone through the absolute roof, but just as has ordering wine with takeout, ordering alcohol with takeout, or consumers looking at different ways to interact, the virtual tasting with friends now. So, but look beyond the platitudes. Consumers, particularly if they've been to your winery before, will be full of praise for your wines simply because they've been there, and that is because it's reinforcing that they have made a good decision. So look beyond those platitudes. They feel good, but recognize that existing customers, they're unlikely, they'll tell you if things are going wrong, they're more likely to do so, but they are very keen to reinforce their support and interest to you. So look beyond those and know what your value is to them. not necessarily financially, but that would help. Calculating customer lifetime value is certainly one opportunity that you should be, or one tool you should be looking at as well. But what your wines mean to them for their day-to-day life, for their lifestyle, for their daily consumption experience, for the social interaction that it brings to them. You should want to know how they consume wine in general, not just your wine. I think this is one of the major failings that most wine producers forget about. They often ask about themselves, but they seldom ask about the consumer or where else consumers have been. How often they consume wine. I mean, that's something that's always a question which is going to get a slightly defensive response. But knowing when consumers consume wine, if they have a weekday wine, there are ways you can get around this or ask the question so people don't feel concerned about saying how much or how little they consume. But where and when they purchase wine and under what conditions. So, I mean, understanding that the online wine purchaser is also the face-to-face wine purchaser, but they're purchasing in different platforms for different reasons. So different motivations, and in this case, it's a lack of other opportunities, but there are also, think of it this way, one of the things that, one of the messages that came out from wine.com is that a bulk of their customer base through the coronavirus has been new customers. So people who have been compelled to get on that platform, they know that a proportion of them are going to stay on the platform just because they've had experience with it. So recognize that even though it may seem that they were the ones biased to benefit financially from this platform, recognize that as the economy opens back up again, they'll have a larger body of customers who will also offer more opportunity through producers who are adept at and interested in distributing their wine through that platform. How often do consumers visit the region? Thinking about the wine tourism effect. We know that consumers, when they visit wine regions, they think of the experience in a holistic basis, not just as one winery or another. So they look at the experience and it all has to be positive for them to come away thinking, I want to do that again. So understanding how often people visit the region, not how often they visit you, when they're in a region, those sorts of things, that information should be used as a means to generate future wine sales with your customer base. Asking them, in the lead up, the information's come out from Sonoma County Vintners about the protocol to be followed for opening up tasting rooms. If you're not informing your customer base that that's happening, and as a pre-existing or loyal customer, you want to give these people the opportunity to come back and visit us and give you a chance to thank them for their support. Those are the sorts of messages that should be going out now. Not messages that come out saying, hey, we've got wine available, why aren't you buying it? Make sure focus your message on brand development, brand recognition. You're always balancing the difference between brand recognition and sales triggering. And if you're focusing only on sales triggering, you are going too far into one direction. Consumers recognize that they are a wallet for your business, but if that's the only way they feel, they're going to go somewhere else where they feel like they're more valued as a customer rather than just a financial means of support. So what do you know so far about virtual tastings? Okay, so I'll come back on that one. I'm particularly interested in this platform. I've been talking about it, discussing it and writing about it a number of times, and I was most intrigued with an article by Robert Joseph in Meininger's Wine Business International about 3 weeks ago, I think, or a month ago. He was pretty much saying the problem with the virtual tasting is that most of us are just making it boring. It's because we're following the model that we believe we have to follow, in that wine tastings are all about analysing the wine. The reality for most consumers, and this is more than 90% of wine consumers, most consumers don't analyse the wine. Wine is a means for their lifestyle. It's a means for social interaction, conviviality, enjoyment, relaxation, all of these other things beyond what the wine actually tastes like. And so I have to admit that in more recent virtual tastings that I've been involved in, a few wineries and some publicly put up there by eBusiness Solutions have pretty much shown that consumers will happily sit in and watch a wine tasting as long as there is some form of either interaction possible and or a means to appreciate things beyond just the wine. If it's just about the wine, people turn off in droves. So whether it's about encouraging a recipe exchanges, cooking and wine. The use of celebrity has been particularly successful. Someone who is entertaining, someone who is informative in a way that is of interest to the customer base, not specifically the wine producer. Offering a platform that kind of facilitates that interaction among the audience at the same time. Those are the sorts of things that really should be the focus of virtual tastings, not about telling people how great your wine is or what the sensory profile is. No human being outside of the wine trade sits down and discusses wine at length regarding the sensory qualities of it. They pretty much keep it simple, and then when they develop an interest in it, they might find that those things are more those discussions are more interesting. But that's not really the mode for the virtual tasting. The virtual tasting is about your customer base. Do something that is going to be of interest to them, of value to them, not something that is going to be promoting your product. We haven't got any other questions, and I'll come up to the last slide. So I'll move on to common challenges and oversights, and specifically, there really is some good news among the carnage that we're seeing. And I'll highlight, one of the concerns, I know that there's a concern about cutting costs. That's not specifically in the long term the way to go, and I know it's necessary to have more efficient distribution of resources. I'm not trying to downplay the importance of financial management, particularly for those who are heavily leveraged in on-premise and are struggling to move product. But there needs to be a more efficient means to create a brand awareness for you. And so the research has consistently shown, and this is over decades of research. I looked extensively into this when I first read the reality. And during times of economic crisis, that's when you should be spending money on marketing. It's when you should be spending money on trying to generate an interest for your brand. Why? Because as the market turns around, those brands that were investing in marketing during an economic crisis are 3 times more successful financially than brands that just cut costs. So you've got to look at and that's across industries, across geographies, over extensive time periods. The literature on this goes back to originally in the 60s. So it's really, I can't reinforce enough how important it is now to look at ways that you can spend efficiently to increase that level of brand awareness. And there's a logic behind it, because you think about it, most businesses, they're cutting costs, so they're not spending money on those sorts of things. So the brands that do have a double benefit. They benefit because there's less competition out there, because less people are spending, and also the agencies that are taking that money to help promote or to help advertise are usually doing so at a discounted rate. So there are reasons financially, it makes good financial sense to consider that, but also the outcomes generally put you in good stead for as things turn around. So how you can do that collectively is a really good way of generating awareness. The loss of on-premise and DTC is a challenge to most food producers. I'm not insensitive to those needs. I know that's a big challenge. And there are ways that the short term is to look at generating brand awareness, recognize that people are happy to help and want to help your brand, particularly if they've got a pre-existing relationship with your brand, but just asking straight up. It's like whenever you're making an ask to a business to invest money into the Wine Business Institute, we don't call people up on the phone and ask them as the opening call. There is a process in investigating the interest for people, what people see as being created in our brand, as relevant to them, as something that they want to be able to support. And so finding those ways effectively is really important. Oversights, your email list should not be seen as a unique tool to trigger sales. By all means, use your email list. It could be a case of asking questions, how people are getting through this, what does wine mean to them, what wines aside from yours they're drinking. Look, there is nothing more credible than a third-party recommendation. When you promote your brand because of the trophy that it won or the review it got, the consumer takes that with a grain of salt. It might help them, it certainly does help to a degree, but what it doesn't do is convince people of it. But if someone like a neighbouring business talks about how great it is to see a neighbour achieving recognition, someone else saying how good you are, much better than the self-serving approach of promoting yourselves. So look at ways that you can get interact with others and have a mutually beneficial means for being able to communicate credible messages on behalf of your partners, neighbours, and contributors in your local area. Also, don't get caught up in this idea that you have to cover all different platforms or you have to look at all different tools. Just start with one that seems to provide an opportunity for you, whether that's whether it's a social media platform, whether it's a particular organization that you want to work with, whether it's a distribution a network that you want to take advantage of. If you can start with one and see some success with that, then it's easier to leverage that. If you try and cover everything, you'll just feel overwhelmed and you'll do everything poorly instead of one thing well. So just kind of start incrementally. Set yourself some short-term goals to see them you can get things to work. The number of producers, when I spoke about the challenge in using Twitter, I published on this back in 2011. And I was first talking about the problem being that consumers were using Twitter to talk about wine in general, but producers were talking about their wine specifically. There was this real mismatch in the communications tool. And so many producers I'd speak to in Europe about this and say, well, have you tried using social media? And they'd say, oh yeah, I tried it for a month and it didn't work. And you'd look over their communications, and it was pretty much a consistent offering where they turn around and say, hi, we're a winery, come and buy wine from us. Hi, we're a winery, come and drink, come and visit our winery. Hi, we're a winery, we want to sell you, we want to sell wine to you. Complete misunderstanding of the platform and how people use it. So just because you've used it doesn't mean you've used it well. Just because you may have used it well, you may not have used it long enough. There's certainly a learning period that consumers take on board with the use of any new platform as a communications tool. Recognize that the credibility is not something that you can build up overnight or instantaneously. It's something that takes time to earn. And so people need to be able to have faith in that your messaging is consistent with what they are interested in, and then they will come on board. So it's a long-term solution, but it's something you need to be investing time in working on now. So there are also, collaboration is finding a lot of success at the moment. We're starting to see partnership and promotional opportunities. This example on the side of the page, I know it's an obscure one, but you can see there that's the insights from a post that was posted 4 days ago by Mirabeau and Provence, which is the #1 rosé producer in the UK and Northern European market. They posted a collaborative sponsorship arrangement with L'Occitane, the cosmetics company, and essentially that post received, as you can see there, almost 4,500 comments, and got out to 23,000 people in a matter of days. So it was collaborating with a different field, but utilising or leveraging on the success of the two different brands. There's the e-tailing platform. They're also doing virtual tastings. It could be a good way to get into it. Using the tasting as a virtual tasting as a reward to customers, or as a platform for customers to use. Remember, most people don't have a Zoom or a webinar subscription. So if you happen to offer one that doesn't cut out after 30 minutes or 40 minutes or however long it is these days, that could be an opportunity to have after work drinks for people, not just your people. So, giving people a means to collaborate and to interact is something that you do and can do now. The Mirabeau and Provence example was just the one I put out there because that brand didn't exist 10 years ago. It was a brand that was created when a couple moved to the south of France and decided to buy into the wine industry, and they saw an opportunity for rosés in the market. And so that brand came out of nowhere and grew from small to being one of the largest in a relatively short period of time through a consistent execution of marketing strategies that catered to the interests of wine consumers. So why can't this sort of thing be done for Sonoma County, for those of you who are members of Sonoma County Vintners? I suspect that it can. How? That's something that you'll have to figure out amongst yourselves. So conclusions, we know that this pandemic, everyone is struggling. Everyone's struggling a big time in this situation. Just to recognise that your customers are having difficulties as well. And so issues such as cold calling for trying to attract new customers, it's not an approach I would endorse to any way, shape or form. It may generate incremental sales, but it'll kill you in the long term. And it's also going to alienate potential customers. The feedback from those wineries, people are naming and shaming online. And so if wineries aren't good at monitoring online as it is, that is a very easy and quick way to get burnt from a potential customer base. I certainly didn't mention that to either of the calls I received yesterday, but I kept trying to turn the discussion to things that were of interest to me, to the as a customer. And I wasn't interested in buying the wines that were being proposed, but I did say I'd be interested in coming out to the tasting room. What's your outlook on that? When is that coming up? And those questions, not only were they ignored, but there was no opportunity to turn around and say, look, do you mind us contacting you when we've got a time in place so that we can organise a time to thank you for your interest in the brand and treat you when you can come out to the winery. There's a very simple exercise, a very simple process, which would have kept me on as a customer instead of making me think about avoiding that wine at all costs. Think of those opportunities to focus on generating brand awareness. On-premise as an off-premise channel, that's certainly one thing we haven't looked at. We're not very well adept at catering to, but certainly being able to pivot in that regard. And even if you're concerned about the impact on your brand, if you have the capacity to develop an umbrella brand or a co-brand or act in collaboration by supplying product with others, so that you can cater to wine in a can, or it might be it might be round glasses with lids on them. I mean, there are different packaging options here. It doesn't necessarily need to be a 187 ml bottle of wine, but there are options there, and that is a platform which will grow in value in the short term as consumers start to learn that's a way that they can get alcohol delivered to them. So I would be looking at investigating that prominently. E-tailing, there is margin available as well as volume. Yes, the numbers that are coming out from the big players are showing that their average purchase, the average unit purchase price has gone down, but most of that has come from new customers who are coming in and who traditionally weren't buying anything through that platform because the products were more expensive. But they're showing that average spend for most people who are existing is actually up. We're seeing a case of where consumers who are getting into that platform are spending up because they're treating themselves. They're wanting to feel good about it. So it does offer a potential, as well as moving volume, as also being a means to help retain value of your product in the off-premise environment, which you may not have previously looked at. The virtual environment, it's time to bite the bullet. If you haven't already done so, that's definitely one of the key messages you have to get out there. Focusing on what you can do, even if it's just little things like highlighting notifications when someone communicates with you through one of those platforms. That would be a simple thing that you could do, even if you used a chatbot, to respond automatically to say, thank you for communicating with us. This message has been communicated to the marketing manager and we'll get back with you within 24, 48, however many hours it might be, but then stick to that. Make sure that that's something you've got a process for being able to do that. Customers are out there and they're trying to get in touch with you about these sorts of things. You can, if you look at your brand through any of the online platforms, you do a search for it, mentions and the like, you'll get a really good feel for how people feel and for what's of interest to them. Not just your brand, but look at your competitors, look at the regions around you. Appeals should be used about information from you that is of value and interest to the customer. Themes of using humour and current events are really important messages to get out there. And creating messaging that moves the customer from being aware of you to preference for you is really important, because if we don't do that and we don't get that right, we end up with a situation that's something like this, where you can see there's supposed to be a great interaction there, but the new customer misses the opportunity completely and goes to where they are most familiar. So if you are getting into something new, you really have to make sure that you are doing so in a way which is credible, adds to your authenticity, and shows an interest from the consumer's perspective, rather than just the producers. So that's specifically they're the elements I wanted to work on. I know we've got, I think you've got just over 15 minutes left for any Q&A for anyone who's got any queries there. I did want to kind of highlight, I've got a situation where I've got messages that the Q&A. People have found the Q&A session up there as well. That's it's good to see. Are there any legal implications with virtual tastings? Yes, but the implications have they've been opened up. There are messages that have come from the TTB, the ABC about virtual tastings, how samples can be delivered accordingly, and issues regarding the use of free delivery in the current environment. So I'm not a legal expert. I'm not going to talk about what they are, but there are certainly connections to that. And I know Sonoma County Vintners have distributed from the Wine Institute regarding that particular issue. Second question we've got here. Let's see. I can go out to having dealt with that one. What do I expect the channel shift to be in terms of customer and subscription acquisition sources? I think sorry, just with the question underneath that, the poll is disappearing again. Yes, I think that's when I clicked on the poll on the presentation. I didn't see this question. I'm sorry until that point in time. So but I will reopen at the end of this presentation for anyone who wants to supply their responses. They will be used. They're very helpful. Thank you for that. So I'll give you the opportunity to do that after this. Just here for those who haven't seen it, this is on the Slido platform. That will be left open. There's a tab there in that platform for questions and answers. Even after this presentation, and I'll close it out based on when Jessalyn wants some things to close up, and we'll come to that in a minute. But I just wanted to point out that you can continue to post questions there if anything comes to mind afterwards. I will be looking at that and looking at those questions as a means to direct what my next article is going to be about, based on the feedback and the interest that you have on the topics that we've presented in this webinar. What do I expect the channel shift to be in terms of customer and subscription acquisition sources? It's difficult to say because we know the traditional model looks at the 80-20 breakdown on volume. Value is far more skewed towards on-premise than off. And so traditionally on-premise has been used as kind of image development, and off-premise has been used in the volume. To what degree that's going to change, I certainly expect e-tailing to become much more popular as we get through this situation, because for most consumers, just there's the big barrier to actually using something they're not familiar with. So the fear of how long it takes, how it works, not having faith in it, or whatever it might be, that's people have kind of been compelled to use it anyway. And for many, they'll go, actually, this wasn't as bad as I thought. So it'll end up becoming part of the platform. So I suspect there's going to be, in the short term, substantial growth in e-tailing for the wine industry. To what degree that's going to take away sales from on-premise in the future, I think a lot of that's going to be constrained by the limited opportunities for on-premise sales, because we know already that on-premise will come back. Consumers are going to be reticent to just get back out. There'll be some who will jump out at the opportunity because they can't stand being locked up or feeling stuck in their home. But for many consumers, they're going to be taking it very slowly and carefully. Couple that in with the fact that restaurant regulations regarding seating and social distancing will need to be adapted to, and that will, by definition, limit the number of consumers who are going to jump back into that. So I expect, certainly in the short to medium term, on-premise to have limited opportunities to do so, but there lies an opportunity with on-premise takeout. I think while those regulations are allowed and there's an opportunity to do so, you'd be mad not to look at the opportunity to brand and distribute your wines through that platform in a way that can benefit in the long term, and can pivot from if the constraints come back on premise and delivery. So I'll go through from that question. I'll come back to Dan's question. Curbside and delivery don't seem to be going anywhere. Do you have thoughts on how wineries can help support accounts to better the experience for consumers? This seems like a new frontier to build brands. Yes, absolutely. I think curbside delivery, I mean, to what degree does any winery actually have a method in place for them being able to adapt to that? That's I'm reminded of my experience growing up in Australia, and the drive-through liquor store is pretty much ubiquitous across the country. So the whole concept of driving through and picking up alcohol is not unknown to me. And I can tell you it's certainly a popular format, particularly at times of convenience. So the after working, the end of the workday hours, the weekend, peak periods, those sorts of things there. I would be looking at timing for manning those. So potentially having a platform or an interface that's purpose built for that sort of thing might that could also pivot to be, say, a greeting location for customers entering the tasting room in future. I don't know to what degree or how permanent something like that would be, but I think that's certainly there's certainly an opportunity to consider something like that. I would also consider the potential to have it as a regionally specific curbside delivery area. You might have one, or you might have cycles where different wineries do it on behalf of a number in the area, so that the load is shared amongst partner wine businesses. So I think there are definitely opportunities there to communicate or to interact more effectively with the customer, as well as there is with an opportunity to attract new customers through new forms of distribution. I'll go back to Kristen's question there on. I was going to say, let's see, that one's been done. Okay, I'm trying to get to making sure I'm flipping successfully through the different platforms that we're using. What's the impact of strong brand loyalty showing during this time? It's difficult to say at this stage, but one of the things that we do know is that those brands that have the greatest salience, rather specifically than loyalty, are the brands that are doing better. And so again, it reinforces the idea that having that awareness in the mind of the consumer is really important. Brand loyalty is also a little bit, it's measured differently to a degree in the wine industry than it is in a number of other industries. A lot to do with the almost limitless proliferation of competing options at the point of sale for most off-premise distribution channels. If you think of it logically, new consumers tend to be more loyal, certainly in the early stages of their experience with wine brands. And a lot of that's due to the fact that they have limited experience. And because wine can come across as being intimidating, you have those consumers who stick to the brands that they know. And if you look back at the purchase history of new consumers to the category, they tend to buy and repurchase what they're familiar with until they're exposed to another brand. So if you find something you like, you buy that repeatedly for, so the chance of repurchasing that brand is 100% to begin with. Then when you're introduced to another brand because another friend introduced you to one, or you tried one at a party that you liked and you found that it was something that's available in your normal purchase space, all of a sudden the chance of you buying that same initial brand again is 1 in 2. And so it ends up being a chance of your brand being purchased at any one time is 1 over the number of considered alternatives. So ironically, younger consumers or the less experienced consumers are showing more loyalty, and that's what's being played out with the numbers that we're seeing, certainly with them through the e-tailing platform. And so trying to recognize that you have to constantly be trying to attract new customers, even if your brand has relied on allocation only because you've got excessive demand for those wanting to be on your wine club list. The reality is, and as this has shown us, is that isn't always reliable. And if you're not looking at means to try and turn over your list or to expand the access to that list, you are not giving new consumers an opportunity to come back to you, and you're one of the brands that is most likely to get dropped as consumers are hit with this situation. We do know that in times of financial crisis, the brands that at the top end of the market tend to suffer the most because consumers drop value before they drop volume. So they tend to trade down first. So even though it shows how important it is to be able to understand how brand loyalty exists and what benefit it has, but also recognizing that it's not a static concept. It changes based on the commercial environment at the time. I think the last question I'll look at is advice on collaborating with partners without violating tied house laws. I know that that's been traditionally been a big change, and I don't want to make I don't want to open up a legal can of worms here, but I remember one of the simpler solutions was as long as you offer alternatives to just one source of purchasing of your brand, that you are effectively finding a way to not trigger an impact from tied house laws. But I would encourage every one of you to make sure that that is cleared with your legal team, to make sure that you've got something covered there. But as long as you are not just focusing on direct recommendations or direct solutions to a unique business, there are ways around that. There are also benefits in having your consumers, your customer base. They're the ones, if they're familiar with them, with messages from you about ways that they can, where they can find your wine, and they are the ones who are encouraged to interact with you online. If a consumer recommends where your wine can be purchased, that's certainly one way to help not trigger an impact from the tied house laws. But I have to be very careful with mentioning that there. I don't want to recommend any practice that is going to trigger legal intervention. But I think for the time being, they're the sorts of things that I would keep on board and utilise to be able to get through this process. I think. Jessalyn, I've certainly got them close to the time that we've had assigned for this webinar. I don't want to go over, so I want to make sure that I've got them giving you the opportunity to close things out and to make sure that that the audience has gotten all the information they need. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Damien. We really appreciate you joining us today. And as Damien said, we will have this recording ready for you guys to probably be distributed within the next couple days. And then the Slido survey will be open for the next 24 hours if you have any questions or would like to communicate. We'll also be sharing Damien's information in the email that goes out with this recording. And I think I'm reviewing the Q&A in the chat, and I don't think we have any further questions. So we look forward to maybe even making this another series and having some more information later in the year. But we really appreciate you, Damien, for joining us today. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jessalyn. Thanks, everyone in the audience. Thanks also for your questions. Feel free to reach out if there's anything that I can do to help. I'm certainly doing my bit to drink as much Sonoma County wine as I possibly can, in moderation, of course, at all times. So thanks for the opportunity. I hope that's been helpful for you. Best of luck. I appreciate all the time and attention that you've afforded this webinar today, and I look forward to meeting you all in person at some stage in the near future, and hopefully over a glass of wine. Cheers, Jessalyn.
Cheers.